What is a river? A river is a living ecosystem. It is not just a mere channel of water, but a real magic at work that sustains a variety of life forms and functions. We must see river as a living entity. It is an ecosystem in motion with freshwater, sediments and biota. Cultures and civilizations of the world have centered and flourished around the rivers. They are not human artifacts, and most of the landscapes or the landforms, the ecosystem that we see around the river, they have taken millions of years to evolve, including thousands of cyclic flood pulses, drought cycles, and the sedimentation. We used to introduce ourselves with the river that flowed in our village, whether big or small. A healthy river is a resilient river, and it can withstand climatic variability to a large extent, protecting people and the ecosystems in its catchments. But there is a development paradox. We look at a river just like a channel, and we don't understand the connections of a river with the landscape, with the habitat. Then we make a mistake. We must see river as a whole fluvial system, including all the adjacent floodplains with its diverse riparian forest. And we remember once the quote from Russell. He once wrote, "And individual human existence should be just like a river, whether small at first and then narrowly contained within its banks and rushing passionately past rocks and over waterfalls. Gradually the river grows wider, banks recede, water flows more quietly, and finally merges in the sea and painlessly loses its individual being." A river is a mirror of its catchments. It can provide the image of the city or town it passes through. Bashir Badrji once wrote, "अगर फुर्सत मिले तो पानी की तहरीरों को पढ़ लेना, हर एक दरिया हजारों सालों का अफसाना लिखता है." If you want to understand about a city or a town, just go and look at its water. It can provide you what is happening on the land. For example, take the Yamuna in Delhi. What we have done to this river. If you see the biological oxygen demand, it is almost like a filthy drain. What we have done to our Gomti river, also a tributary of the Ganges. What we have done to Hindon. If you want to know about Ghaziabad, just look at Hindon. If you want to understand Meerut, look at Kali river. If you want to know about Ramganga river, look what is happening at Bareilly. Sadly, most of the rivers have largely lost their original characteristics. A river has three sources of water. It is fed by the rain or the snowmelt or the groundwater. Many rivers are only fed by rain and groundwater, and they do not get any water from the snowmelt. They are called plain-fed rivers or non-glacial rivers. More than 90% of global available fresh water, including the base flow of rivers, lakes and wetlands, especially during the periods of low or no rainfall, is maintained by natural hydrological patterns of groundwater. Even the contribution of snow melt in the river Ganga is only about 17% of its flow. On an average, each square kilometer of the Ganga basin receives about 1 million cubic meter of water as rainfall, and 30% of this volume is lost as evaporation, 20% seeps to the groundwater, and the remaining 50% is available as surface runoff. Most of the floodplains and the floodplain ecosystems, they have taken thousands of years to establish using natural cycles of seasonal overflows or floods and the dry spells or the droughts. The ecological health of a river is a function of channel morphology and all associated physical and ecological processes. For example, the discharge, the erosion, the sedimentation, the aquatic life, and so on and so forth. Clean rivers and healthy aquatic life symbolize that the ecosystem is functioning very well. And healthy tributaries and wetlands, they support the life function of a river. A river is not just about its main channel. There are many tributaries, smaller channels, and streams which feed into the main stem of the river. And they are equally important. A healthy river should meet 5 major criteria. First of all, we want our rivers to be clean. The water should be clean so that you can take bath, you can swim, and you can use the river for drinking purposes. Even the wildlife can survive, and so on. Secondly, we want to maintain a healthy flow regime. The river must flow. And in Sanskrit, we say, Nadya Vegen Shuddhyati. That means it is the flow of the river that cleanses it. So we want free flow in our rivers. Thirdly, we want to also support the valued biota, the entire fish population, turtles, crocodiles, the dolphins, all the rare and valued biota we want to preserve in our rivers. What else we want? We also want connected vegetation. That is, if there is a river, we also want there should be a healthy riparian buffer, or the corridor of the river should be green. It should not be like a concrete wall. It is a very ugly sight. If you go and look at a river, you also look at the surrounding, the catchment, the floodplains, and the entire fluvial ecosystem is very, very important. So we say that we must maintain the healthy vegetation. And the fourth point, which is very important, we want to connect the channel with the landscape. As I always highlight in my presentations, that still you are only focusing on the main channel of the Ganga river. But you are forgetting the countless numbers of water bodies, the ponds, the wetlands, the lakes. You must have heard the song, Taal mile nadi ke jal mein, nadi mile sagar mein, sagar mile kaun se jal mein, koi jane na. So the beginning starts from the Taal, the wetlands, the ponds, and they meet these smaller channels. And the smaller channels become bigger streams, and they go on and ultimately meet the ocean. Every order of stream is important. On its onward journey, several tributaries join the main channel of the Ganga river to form a large drainage basin. And every drainage basin is unique due to its shape, its size, the number of streams, the slope, the landforms. According to Central Water Commission, there are 22 major river basins in India. And each of these rivers have their own sub-basins, which are smaller river basins. In fact, smaller streams feed the main channel of the river through a well-connected network of streams, And the smallest stream is the first order stream that feeds to the slightly bigger stream of the second order. And then the second order stream feeds to the third order of stream, and third to the fourth, and ultimately we have the master drain or the main channel of the river. Take for example the Kali Sindh river. It originates in the Vindhya range in Dewas district of Madhya Pradesh. It flows for about 550 kilometers and joins the Chambal river. The Chambal river flows for about 1000 kilometers and joins Yamuna near Etawah district in UP. And Yamuna finally joins the Ganga river at Prayagraj. So Kali Sindh is a smaller river, Chambal is an intermediate river, and Yamuna is the large river. The condition of the smallest stream will be having a bearing on the health of the larger stream, that is health of the next order stream it joins. Therefore, every order of stream is important. If you want to improve the health of a river, start from the first order of stream. All these smaller rivers ultimately merge together with the large river downstream. Spring-fed rivers in the upper Himalaya bring in fresh water to the large rivers in the entire Ganga alluvial plain. Rivers and their connected landscapes are the fluvial heritage. Rivers and their connected landscapes, they are part of our natural heritage. They have taken millions of years to evolve, and they have come to their current forms and shapes with thousands of years of natural action. With the upsurge of Himalayas about 35 million years back, a vast depression was made between the peninsular region and the Himalayas. This depression was filled with sand and clay from Ganga and many of its tributaries. Therefore, a vast reservoir of fresh water was built layers by layers in the form of large aquifer systems beneath the Ganga alluvial plain where we are standing today. The aquifer systems of the Ganga basin are the biggest storehouse of groundwater in the world. The aquifer material is brought by the Ganga river and many of its tributaries. Tropical rivers like ours, they swell many folds during the monsoon, and they need areas to spread water and sediments. The periodic cycle of floods and droughts, they have been going on since rivers started flowing. This cyclic pattern of monsoon itself is a 15 million years old phenomena. A natural floodplain along the rivers, they withstand flooding, and this helps in recharging of our water deficient aquifers. One of the main purposes of protecting floodplain as water sanctuary is to improve the recharging of water resources and ensure sustainability of our water dependent ecosystems, including the survival of human beings. Flow is a master variable. The alluvial channels refer to the river channels that flow through very sediments which have been previously deposited by these very rivers. And rivers have great energy. They are capable of modifying their own channels, both shape and size. A flowing river exerts erosional force, while the bed materials and the banks, they provide resistance to the erosion. So the shape and size of the channel would depend upon the river discharge or flow and the size of the sediments. The word fluvial refers to anything which is produced by the action of a river. So we say fluvial forms, we say fluvial processes, and we say the entire fluvial systems or the fluvial dynamics. So rivers are moving systems. Many physical, biological, and chemical factors, they affect their motion. Physical factors like force, mass, momentum, and energy, they affect the entire fluvial dynamics. A flowing water carries sediments, and so it affects the bed form features, the habitats, and the entire connected landscapes. The entire Ganga alluvial plain is the living example of how sediment transport in the entire alluvial channel through thousands of years of flooding cycles and the droughts, it can produce such a large flat tract of land with so many water bodies, with so many habitat. The floodplains and the forested river corridor along the rivers, they provide a natural filter to help purify, rejuvenate, and restock our water supply. Flooding is a part of natural cycle, and it redeems our soil, our ecology, and our groundwater. So two things are extremely important for tropical rivers: the free flow and the free flooding. A river must flood. Rivers must flow without any obstruction, any fragmentation. They must bring in floods to deposit the sediments and the nutrients onto the floodplains. Protecting rivers are important, but also important is the protection of the catchments, the floodplains. We just have to ensure that we don't encroach upon the terrace of the rivers, which are part of the river systems. Large rivers are characterized by a well-developed floodplain. Floodplain is the result of deposition of sediments during lateral migration of the channel or during the overbank flooding. Therefore, flooding is very important cycle of a river. The flow will also govern how the sediment is deposited, and this further contributes to the type of habitat which is designed and made available to different types of aquatic biota. There are three different types of bed forms: mud, riffles, and pools, and they provide suitable living space to the aquatic organisms. Mud is made through process of accumulation of fine grained sediments in slow moving rivers, which become site for the growth for small invertebrates and for fish eggs. Many rivers originating in the upper Himalayas have deeply incised bedrock channels in the upstream, and this transforms into alluvial rivers in the downstream, close to the delta. A lot of variation is observed in channel properties within a river basin, and that is also between small rivers, intermediate rivers, and large rivers. And these variations are due to varying bed material and grain size, channel slope topography, channel width and depth, stream discharge and flow velocity. They also play a major role. River morphology is highly affected by these properties, which is delivered to the main channel from the upstream to the downstream. River morphology or channel configuration is determined by four factors. First of all, stream discharge is very important. that is the flow volume from upstream to the downstream and their time distribution. Second important factor is the entire sediment load input that a river is receiving. The sediments which are delivered to the channel, their volume, their time distribution and their character. Third important factor is the bed and bank material composition, that is nature of the material through which the river is passing through or flowing through. And finally, the fourth major factor is the local topography. The topographic gradient or slope profile through which the entire river flows is very, very important. In fact, morphology of a river is affected largely by the volume and character of the sediments which is delivered to the channel from upstream to the downstream. The bed material size changes along the river channel. Very fine materials are transported in the flow itself because they are lighter in the suspension, and they are deposited during floods when overbank flows occur. We call it floodplain deposition. Then the coarser sediments, they are transported near the bed of the river. Because of their greater weight, they are heavier, so they are locally deposited onto the channel in the form of bars. Bar accumulations affect the river flow characteristics. Riverbed sediments influence the turbulent properties of the water flow. The bed form depends upon the size of the bed materials and the flow volume and their strength. The flowing water in a river is the result of force. Force changes into a state of motion, and that motion changes the entire body of water. It is a vector quantity, and it has both magnitude and direction. In nature, several forces are in action. The driving force and a resistance force are particularly important for a flowing river. They move a mass of water with a particular acceleration. A flowing river moves even larger boulders from one place to another place. So enough force must be exerted over the required distance to move a large piece of boulder. If a river is flowing above a rough surface, it must spend energy, and the potential energy results from its position with respect to some reference level, and the kinetic energy results from its motion as the river flows. So the potential energy of a flowing river will decrease as it moves from mountains to the plains with decreasing elevation above sea levels, but the kinetic energy increases with increasing stream velocity. In the context of river processes, fluxes are very important, and they refer to flow sediment interactions, how the sediments are interacting with the river flows. Large channels are often dominated by sandy bed material, and they have large sand bed forms. Size of the drainage basin will also determine the water supply at a given point along a drainage basin. There is an increase in stream discharge with drainage basin, area of the drainage basin. The channel width will also increase as the river moves more rapidly than the depth of the river from upstream to the downstream. Large rivers split to form delta with accumulated sediments at the end before merging into the sea, and the braided rivers are associated with high energy environments, high sediment loads, and unstable channel banks. So the variable flow regime of a river must be respected. The variable flow regimes act as an overriding factor in shaping the entire habitat, whether it is pool or run or riffle. And they also structure the aquatic habitat or the biota. In general, the more variable flow regimes that mimic natural flow, the better would be the species composition and richness and abundance. And one very important factor is that the groundwater sustains the river flows. Groundwater is our lifeline. It makes our ponds, our wetlands and rivers flow. We get rains only for a few days. It is the recharge to the aquifers that gradually yields back to the water bodies. And this precious groundwater is nurtured in the floodplains, along the rivers and in the forests. So just like protected forests and national parks, we need water sanctuaries. We need areas as protected landscapes on both sides of the river for recharging the rainwater. And this is best done naturally, as nature has marked many special recharge areas through thousands of years of natural cycles. And those sites are the best sites for recharge, such as river terrace, floodplains, ponds and forests. So a natural floodplain improves water quality, it conditions the soil, and it nurtures plants and animals. The water that reaches the rivers and lakes are in a better condition and part of a healthier environment. A good coverage of vegetation acts as a refuge to wildlife, and it also improves the habitats. So protecting water bodies are very important in cities and towns. But also important is the protection of the entire watersheds. We just have to ensure that we don't encroach upon these blue landscapes. One of the very remarkable observations in these days are that the perennial rivers are becoming seasonal rivers, and that is happening due to loss of base flows. The perennial rivers have become seasonal rain-fed rivers, and they have dried up at several places. Many small rivers and springs have dried up and disappeared from our villages, and that had happened during the last 3 decades. Rapid and unscientific land use changes, deforestation, encroachment, rapid urbanization, and excessive water withdrawal, they are creating havoc to our rivers. Many large perennial rivers have become seasonal, and they are called intermittent rivers. Intermittent or seasonal rivers now exceed the length of the entire world's perennial river networks. The proportion of intermittent rivers could even exceed 50% of the global river network. Many rivers in the Satpura, in Vindhya, in Aravallis, and even in peninsular India, they originate from forests. But due to shrinking forest cover, due to stone quarrying, due to open cast mining, and unabated groundwater exploitation, majority of such streams have become seasonal, or they have been completely wiped out. With the drying of a river, dies the habitat that once flourished with this flowing water. Survival of species becomes at stake when the flow recedes and the quality goes down. A river dries when it is fragmented, and when it stops receiving surface water and groundwater, the river is dead. The excessive dewatering of aquifers could spell doom to our rivers. Flows in perennial rivers depend largely on groundwater systems. In fact, groundwater provides base flows to our rivers. If we lose groundwater, we lose the river. While we talk about loss of groundwater tables in few centimeters or few inches per annum, but in reality, it could mean a large scale mass loss for the entire river basin, and that could be in cubic kilometers, not in few inches, and that could be attributed to excessive extraction of groundwater. This can severely dehydrate groundwater dependent ecosystems. So flow variability or hydrologic variation plays a major role in shaping a habitat. So there is a great deal of relationship between flow regimes and a habitat type. Tropical rivers are characterized by distinct flow regimes or cycles which are related to the terrestrial phase or the dry phase or the aquatic phase or the flood phase. The flood phase or the wet phase of a river transports biota of small rivers to the large rivers. The connected vegetated buffer continues to remain robust with overbank flows. Our rivers should be maintained with minimum alterations. They must flow freely in their natural state while maintaining longitudinal, lateral and vertical connectivity. All the aquatic macroinvertebrates, they have different levels of sensitivity towards the wet phase and the dry phase of a river, and it changes in the water quality. The more sensitive biotic organisms, they will tend to either die or migrate from areas that have bad water quality. So in conclusion, I would like to say that we need to protect our landscapes, the connected landscapes. Often the funds on river rejuvenation are spent on making cosmetic changes, such as riverfront projects, which are only detrimental to the health of the river. River cleaning is not river rejuvenation. Many river restoration projects have initiated with minimal scientific context, with quick fix solutions, and that too at the reach scale. And that is happening in a very piecemeal approach. The spatial limitations further inhibit rivers to be restored to natural conditions. Our engineers are not guided by the solid conceptual models of river ecosystem and ecosystem processes. Just like protected forest and national parks, we need water sanctuaries. We need areas as protected landscape for redeeming our fresh water. Thank you so much.